Welcome to LVLS Weekly episode 33. And so many things happened this week that this is going to be a really long one, and I apologize for that. As you can see, if you watched the Sony conference, you'll recognize the pretentious intro that they did, and I figured that would be a funny place to start the video. So we're going to watch the Sony presentation because I watched all the other E3 presentations. This is effectively Sony's, so it only seems fair, but it won't be a live reaction because I've already watched it. So I'm going to skip stuff that is either not interesting to me, yeah bud, we're going to skip it, or go against the values of this channel, which there is at least two games in that court, so we'll be skipping those. So after that, we will jump into my personal history with Capcom arcade fighters, starting with Street Fighter II and talking about various bits and bobs about my time playing those games in the arcade and learning how they work. And then we'll jump into some Dreamcast top 11s because the Dreamcast anniversary just happened. I also have a pickup, so we're gonna just be going today. And that's why we're running a little late, is that I was also finishing up the majority of my Femtendo book and getting that ready to be published. And there's just a couple little things left. So that'll probably be in the next week or two when we talk about that in more detail. So there's just a lot going on for me. So let's jump into LVLS Weekly 33 and Sony. Anyway, let's go ahead and kick this off with what they kicked it off with, which is a Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic remake. They don't really show any gameplay here. There is some dialogue, which you can't hear because, as always, I don't have any audio when I do these streams. But this is supposedly a really good one, but I don't know anything about it personally beyond hearing good things. And BioWare is not involved, I'm sure, because Asper's doing it. So a get for Sony for sure, but I can't say that I'm all that enthusiastic about it. But good for them. I hope people who like the original game are satisfied with the remake. Alright, so the second game they showed was Project Eve, which is such a frenetic game that I really do not know how well the webcam is going to capture it. In a lot of ways, I like what this game's doing. It looks cool. It looks fun. It has some really cool monster designs. It definitely has like a Bayonetta Devil May Cry vibe going on with it. I don't particularly care for the camera work in this trailer because it's very male-gazy. A couple people that watched this when it was going live commented that you could basically see the entirety of the main character's vulva because the outfit is so skin tight, and that's not really great. It does appear that she might have different costumes, so that is a hope. And we don't really know anything about like the story about this game. I'm a little bit more forgiving of Bayonetta being very similar in that regard in terms of really sexing up its protagonist because the character seems in on it. That she wants that. But I don't really get that vibe from this character. She seems to be much more, I don't want to say professional, because Bayonetta certainly gets the job done. Just, it's a different character dynamic, so the camera doesn't feel like she's controlling it, if that makes sense. The game is visually impressive, and like I said, the monster designs are great. The combat looks fun in that hack and slash way. And it definitely screams out, I really would love to be compared to Devil May Cry and stuff like that. We'll see about this one. And it's like, in some ways, I actually like the character's costume, like the top part with the sash that she's got on. But it's like there's other parts that I don't, particularly the exquisite detail of her private areas. But yeah, this game looks pretty cool. It really does. Have to see about that story part, see how it all plays out. But this definitely gives me those vibes of Platinum game or Devil May Cry. And this is why I think more Bayonetta than Devil May Cry is like parts like this where there's like different types of gameplay. Devil May Cry is pretty traditional. Like once you're in it, you're doing combat most of the time. You don't do other stuff. Bayonetta does mini games and stuff like that, which seems to be more what this game's inspiration is. It is interesting though seeing like these. I believe this is a South Korean studio. We're seeing a lot more games from these studios that are pretty big in South Korea showing up in these trailers, which is great. I like this character design actually quite a bit. That one I do like. Alright, we're gonna skip over Wonderlands with Borderlands characters because I don't support Gearbox. Alright, next up is Forspoken, the game whose name I have the hardest time remembering what it is. Which we discover is an isekai. Where this young woman is yanked into a fantasy portal and gains magic and escapes her harsh reality. First off, it's wonderful to see a woman of color as a protagonist in a game like this. We need to see this a lot more often from the big studios. So kudos to Luminous Productions for making that decision. I really like what this game is doing. Unfortunately, there's a lot of talking at the beginning part of this trailer, so you're just gonna have to marvel over the particle effects, which are done poorly twice, once by YouTube and once by me recording it from YouTube. My apologies. But this game looks really fun. Like, this was probably my second favorite game shown off during this conference. Because I think that it looks really well done and it looks fun. I love the movement, which we're going to see shortly. The combat's different and does some unique things. But look at this. I mean, this is my jam. Big worlds, doing cool stuff, playing as a woman. It's like, these are all my things. The movement, like I said here, just looks so good. It's very fluid. I love the way that the effects work as you do this air movement. The combat looks really fun and different. Like, you're shooting little like sparks of magic off your fingers like a gun. Very different. You get to do grappling. Just moving around looks so fun. That's why I'm really hype about this game. And then, like, the combat looks really good. Like, doing all kinds of different stuff. This looks so cool. This is my favorite thing in the whole thing, honestly. Just that ice spell looks so rad. So yeah, this game looks very promising. I'm pretty stoked about it. And now I think I finally remember what his name is. I've always, it's like I get to the 4 and I'm like, what is this? I thought this was an interesting thing to end this on. Was the antagonist beating up your character. Alright, we're skipping Ubisoft's game. And we'll go to Ghostwire Tokyo, which is something I am interested in, although less so than its very memorable debut at E3 2019. I forget her name. I'll put it down below. She left shortly after that E3 reveal and stunning stage presentation that she gave. So I don't really know how much of this is her intentions with this game anymore. If Shinji Mikami took it over, what exactly is going on with it? This is the first we've seen it since then, maybe. There might have been one other showing. It looks interesting. It looks really unique. All of Tango Gameworks games do. I don't really know what's going on. I am slightly disappointed that you're just a dude. But I guess that I had no real understanding of what that would look like. At least you are a Japanese man, so that is a person of color leading a game, so that's good. And they look Japanese. Yeah, that doesn't happen all the time, bud. So yeah, I'm intrigued by this game, but perhaps not as much as I would have been a little while ago. So instead, we're going to watch probably the cutest game of this trailer, of trailers, and my personal pick of the best game that was shown. I think it's Challa? I don't remember. I'll pronounce it correctly when it pops up later. So this game looks like if you combined Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey with Caledonia culture. Because you're basically in an action-adventure game similar to Breath of the Wild, but you get to possess animals and take them over and hang out on this big old island as different creatures and do different things, including, there's 4 animals shown, seagull, turtle, crab, and dog. And then, like, you just have these big old expanses. You've got a sailcloth, basically. You've got a musical instrument. It's a really cool looking game. Just all kinds of stuff I'm into. We've got a young woman protagonist, cultural exploration. It appears that they're going to have the native language, which I think is really cool. I really like the graphic design. I love the way that the game seems to be working. It seems really cool as well. You've got like pirates. You've got like folklore. It's a really cool looking game. There we go. Challa, I'm gonna say. Without knowing the language properly, and it's not said. But I just loved that game. I thought it was really cool looking. But yes, they're Insomniac's making a Wolverine game. Spider-Man was really good, and Miles Morales is really good from what I hear. Insomniac apparently has some issues too, though, so that's also kind of a bummer. I think that they're a good team to be doing a Wolverine game based on how well they did Spider-Man. But again, I'm not really sure how gung-ho I am. I mean, that was one of their big stingers, and it was like, ooh, but it didn't make me go, oh, I really want to play that. Kind of the same deal with Spider-Man 2, unfortunately. If you like car games, Gran Turismo 7 looks like a car game. So here's Spider-Man 2. I could be more interested in this because I think it's great that Miles is a major character in it again. I like Spider-Man a lot, although I'm really more taken with Tom Holland's representation of the character than the more adult one that appears in this game, based on what I've watched of it. But Kraven the Hunter's talking, Venom shows up. The last game was really well regarded, probably the best Spider-Man game that's ever been made. So I have some interest in this, but again, Insomniac has had some issues with toxic work environments, so I'm just not sure if I'm that gung-ho about this either, unfortunately. And last but not least is God of War Ragnarok. So I played God of War 1 and 2 on the PS2. Very different games from this, and I think it does a good job of these new ones of establishing that Kratos is repentant of his older self and is trying to do better, but he's got anger issues and just wants to be left alone, so he's not bothered, but these things keep happening to him. And now he has a son, again, and he's trying to make up for the last family that he ruined, basically, with his new son. So I think that there's some really cool storytelling stuff going on with God of War, the new ones. And they've moved away from God of War, the disgusting, sexist, like, I don't know, narcissist that existed prior to the PS4 game, which is good. I'm glad that they decided to try to do something different with this series, and I think it's been a massive improvement. And I might try both the original God of War on PS4 and this one, just to see how I feel. I mean, they look fun, and I think having a character like Kratos, who was just a jerk, trying to do better, is a good concept. And the voice acting is good, and it looks fun. The combat looks great. I am potentially here for it, but again, I'm not like I need to go get a PS5 from like anything shown in this entire presentation, which was also a bit of Microsoft's problem, which was like they showed off some neat stuff, but like I didn't get anything that made me go, I want to own this system so I can play this. So I'm still pretty content waiting on a PS5 for a while. I mean, these games aren't coming out till like next year, 2023, and for the most part. And I'm just not in a rush. Plus, I can't get a PS5 even if I wanted one. They're so difficult to get a hold of. So, I mean, Sony did fine. I think this is a decent spot to let it sit. The games look visually impressive, which is the whole point. But on the whole, I didn't see anything here that made me go, gee, I really want to get my hands on that PlayStation 5 so I can play any of these. It just didn't happen. The closest I had was Challa and Forspoken, honestly. So I guess that's just my take on it, is that for most people, I imagine this was like a B+, A- range, maybe even A range because of some of the stuff that was shown off, if you're really into Sony's properties. But I'm not, and so I fell kind of in the B-, C+ range. So there you go. That's my thoughts on Sony's little thing. Let's take a little cat break. welcome back. It's very early, 7:23, and it's still not very bright out yet. So, having to improvise the lighting. Anyway, let's talk about Dreamcast, which will segue quite nicely into the arcade history part, because the Dreamcast actually helped establish a lot of the things that I enjoyed about Capcom arcade games. So we'll go ahead and do the top 11 real fast, but first, breaking news. I got Spirit Fair. That's my pickup this week. The collector's edition finally showed itself, and you know, $200 for an Everlight and a lantern just wasn't enough. Like, I just didn't feel like it was worth it to me. I was hoping maybe for a figure of Stella or something like that, or a physical art book, but the majority of the stuff I was interested in just came on the standard one. So I got this one. I'm happy about it. I love that game. In terms of games that I played this year, it's probably had the biggest impact on me personally. So I'm very happy to have it physically now. So my top 11 of the Dreamcast is a lot of fighting games. And that's why I said this is like a perfect seg. But there's some other stuff on here too, including a puzzle game, which is rare for me to include a puzzle game on these things. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. So first up is Worms Armageddon at number 11. I've always liked the Worms series. I remember playing it with my friend Chris when I was in high school. He had it on his computer. And when this came out on the Dreamcast, it was kind of like a no-brainer. And while it's a little clunky to actually set up matches in this, it's still pretty fun. It's still a good port of that PC game, and definitely worth looking into if you haven't dabbled with a Worms game at all. The series is still going strong, but I really do feel like its peak was when it was doing the 2D games, and Armageddon just really just kind of cemented a lot of the stuff that series has become known for. Number 10 is Resident Evil Code Veronica. Probably the most controversial old school RE game, to be completely honest. But the reason why that is because of Steve Burnside. Probably the least liked character in the entire canon of Resident Evil, to be completely honest with you. He's just annoying, and I think that's the best way to put it. And as you watch Claire interact with him, you just want to scream at her, like, why are you getting any remotely involved with this character, even the faintest hint of romantically? I mean, sure, he's cute, but that personality, though. It also doesn't do a great job in terms of a antagonist character going into drag, and really doing a very campy and nowadays would be considered offensive trope. That's not great either. But in terms of like the rest of the gameplay and other stuff about Code Veronica, I do like it quite a bit. I like Wesker's return, and that kind of cemented him in the direction that he became one of my favorite villains. Claire has some really great CG in this game, and I really like playing as her in Code Veronica. And I think outside of probably 2 Remake, her shining moment in the series is in Code Veronica, outside of Steve, of course. And it's the one time I don't dislike Chris Redfield. The entire franchise. He's actually fine in Code Veronica. It's got cool set pieces, the monster design's solid. It's just, it's one of those games that it feels like an evolutionary, like, mid-step. And that's basically what it is. There was Nemesis and Code Veronica being worked on at the same time, and then you would get 4, which was the true evolution of the series. And Code Veronica did things one way, Nemesis did things another way. Neither of them quite landed the attempt to take the series in a different direction. And I think Code Veronica is more traditional in that regard compared to Nemesis. But it's still a good game, despite those few problems that I mentioned. I think that on the whole, it's really compelling. I'd have to replay it though, and that's kind of why it's down on the lower end of this list. I could probably be convinced that Sonic Adventure or Jet Grind Radio, which are not on my list, would be perhaps better suited to be on here over Code Veronica, but I just have good memories of it. So, number 9 is King of Fighters Evolution, and this is K-Dash, back when Shin Kiro was still at SNK. This is, outside of 11, my favorite KOF game. This was my introduction to that series, and I just really think that it's a really good feeling, looking, sounding game. Best soundtrack in the series is on Evolution. The remix tracks are phenomenal, and it's kind of hard to find them. And I think the roster additions are all solid. K-Dash is a compelling new hero. He was the first new hero following Kyo. The Ness saga gets started here. Honestly, the biggest issue with KOF in the Ness saga is the striker system, because it just feels like a tacked on thing inspired by Capcom, which I suppose it probably was. But 99, I think, is like the pinnacle of KOF prior to 11. Some people like Dream Match or 2002 more, but personally, I like the feel of 99 a lot, and I think that that's a good starting point. And again, it's worth hunting down the Dreamcast disc if you can find it for relatively cheap, because of that soundtrack. Alright, I don't actually have physical copies of the next one, so I'm just gonna pretend that it's here. And it's Power Stone by Capcom. Capcom's second game on this list, and heads up, Capcom has a lot of games on this list, because they were very supportive of the Dreamcast. Power Stone and Power Stone 2 are both excellent, but I'm going with the original because I have more time with it. And I really would like to get both of those games back in my collection, and it's probably going to be the Japanese versions, because it's expensive to buy them now from the North American versions. I like Power Stone more, primarily because it works better as a single player game, and that's how I play most fighting games. I think Power Stone 2 is a fantastic multiplayer experience if you can wrangle 3 people to play it, but when you play it solo, it's a little bit more obnoxious. With Power Stone 1, it's a one-on-one thing, so it's easier to deal with the CPU, especially since it was like the era of Capcom having annoying CPUs in their fighting games, and like the environments are more interesting and compelling because they're more individualized. So I just think Power Stone's the better of the two, personally, but both of them are great. Power Stone 2 is really close to being on this list. It's probably number 12, to be honest. Just really good games, and it would be nice to see them revive somehow, a new game or a collection. I would be happy to see this come back. The next game on the list, let's see, we are at number 7, is the aforementioned puzzle game, and it's Sega Swirl. a free game included on the demo disc of the official Dreamcast magazine. I don't know what it is about Sega Swirl. I don't know if it's that just enthusiastic slow jazz or the simple but addictive gameplay, but man, I love that game. If I were to rank puzzle games, it would probably be like number 2 at the lowest. I just love Sega Swirl. It just hits what I want out of a puzzle game. And it was way before any other like Match 3 or anything else was really out there outside of Panel de Pon. And in terms of just like, and it works differently because you pick a spot on the thing. So it's not like there's a drop mechanic or anything like that. It's just you pick spots that have the most points, and then there you go, and then it loops at the end. It's like there's something about it that really stimulates my brain in a good way. So there you go. If you can get a hold of a Dreamcast demo disc from the official magazine, for kind of in the middle era, you'll get Sega Swirl, and it's really worth it. Number 6 on the list is Project Justice, which is Capcom's best box art on the Dreamcast. Sequel to Rival Schools, and a phenomenal example of Capcom adapting their 2D gameplay into a 3D format. Probably their best attempt prior to Street Fighter 4, to be completely honest. And the character design and the stories are fantastic. Boppin' soundtrack. It looks a little rough for a Dreamcast game in contrast to some of the other ones on this list, but it doesn't matter when it plays as well as it does. It's super fun to play. The gameplay engine for Project Justice is wild, with just your teammates on your squad tagging in and doing all this stuff. And it really just runs with that like high school anime vibe, and it nails it. Which Capcom was good at doing that in this era, because Techromancer really nails that mecha anime vibe as well. So this is a great game, and it is criminally expensive to own it now. So it would be another great series for Capcom to release a collection of. Alright, we're in the top 5, and it's almost all fighting games. And 2 of them are in the same series, and we're going to start with Marvel vs. Capcom 1. The best port of this game, still the best port of Marvel vs. Capcom 1. I'm going to tell you what, Marvel vs. Capcom Origins includes it, but it doesn't include features that the Dreamcast one does, namely the Cross Fever mode, which is one of the most bananas implementations of 4-player multiplayer ever, because your squad is 2 people, but you get to play with a friend. So your partner, so you pick one character to represent you pick the other character to represent your friend, and then you have 2 other friends do the same thing, and then you can tag in, and they change the way the game works. So like the Cross Fever mode that happens in that game lasts longer, and it's just a delight. And it's a shame that Capcom never returned to that idea for anything else. But MVC was what I bought the Dreamcast for in the first place. I had that game on the launch day, 9/9. I bought it as soon as I could, and I didn't get the Dreamcast till December. That's how excited I was, because I loved playing it in the arcade, which very soon I'll talk about that in more detail. But this is why I got a Dreamcast, and I was not disappointed. That's still the original one that I bought from Toys R Us back in 1999. And absolutely love Marvel vs. Capcom. But I do have to admit that I love Marvel vs. Capcom 2 just a little bit more. It's number 4. Mars vs. Capcom 2 was the first game that I really got like super hype about, to the point that I was writing articles on news about it and was actually like engaged with the internet. Like they were finding out characters and I was like, oh my god, Cammy's in the game. I don't remember like anyone else. I just distinctly remember Cammy because she hadn't been seen since X vs. Street Fighter. And you know, in a 56 character roster, which basically threw every Marvel sprite that they did, and then every Capcom sprite that they had done, plus some new ones for both sides, more so on the Capcom side. Just like the roster was immense. And it's an incredibly broken game, don't get me wrong, but that's why it's fun. Even though I am not competitive and I don't know like anything really fancy, it's still fun to play this game and experiment and do stuff that works, because they loosened up the system so much that a lot of things do work, in contrast to where it was before, where it didn't. It's just like, nope, can't link those. Well, how about you can? The 3 team dynamic is also a huge change. I don't really like the assist system, I'll be honest, but being able to link your character supers together is a really cool idea. Being able to do counters with characters coming in is a cool idea. Being able to just do all this neat stuff. That's the thing about MVC2, is that it's a stuff-making game. I fully support Maximilian's free MVC2 hashtag that he's been doing, because it's a game that should be re-released, as should all of the Versus series games. X-Men Children of the Atom all the way up to Mars vs. Capcom 2 should be put together in a bundle. And you can throw the Punisher in there too, just for funsies. It needs to happen. It needs to happen really badly. Number 3 is the other game I bought a Dreamcast for. Because it basically shook me to my emotional core, seeing how good this game looked way back when. And it's Soulcalibur. Namco's finest moment in a lot of ways with their fighting games. In my opinion, I don't like Tekken, so just take that with a grain of salt. The intro is amazing. All the special features, the unlockable gallery, the mission mode, had like the soundtrack, all these costumes, unlockable characters. The redesigned graphics look incredible even now. Gameplay feels great. It's got a really dynamic roster full of interesting and compelling characters that more or less all play differently. There's a few clones, but they do have some of their own stuff. Just an exceptional game from Namco, and unfortunately they didn't really follow it up with anything of note on the Dreamcast. They did like Mr. Pac-Man, Maze Madness, and Mr. Driller, but nothing quite on the level of Soulcalibur. It's kind of disappointing that they just kind of released this landmark title that really redefined fighting games coming to home consoles, because that's really what Soulcalibur did. If you look at the arcade version of Soulcalibur, it is not very impressive looking, but if you look at the Dreamcast one, if done properly, it looks as good as some stuff that's out there now in some ways. Just excellent art design, excellent animation. It's a stunning game. It's a stunning game on all levels. So that is the version to play if you want to experience the Soulcalibur series. None of the sequels, in my opinion, have matched up. Granted, I've only played 2 or 3, so I just really loved this and what it did. Number 2 is Street Fighter Alpha 3. The pinnacle of Capcom's fighting game efforts outside of one game, which I will be featuring in my next section. But Alpha 3 is another example of Capcom going above and beyond with their home port. This one adds characters that the arcade game didn't have. This one adds an entirely new Sakyo mode, which is basically it's known as World Tour mode in America, but in Japan it was Sakyo mode. It's basically take your character through like an RPG-esque mode where you can unlock skills and level up your character, and then you can take that really powerful character into other modes and play them. I have some of the most destructive characters because I have gone through that mode a few times, and it's a bit of a slog to get through it all the way to get like the really good stuff, because it's really hard. But my Sakura, that is like a beast that can do custom combos in a groove, and just bust through guard meter, is a beast. I love her. And on top of that, it's got so many features. So it's feature rich. It's dripping with features. There's training mode, dynamic battle mode, survival mode, which you can play with a friend, and dramatic battle mode. And I spent so many hours playing that with my friend Anthony, and just loving every second. And like when we actually got through it, it was one of the most like euphoric moments in any game for me and for him. I love Alpha 3. It's the version to get unless you have a PSP, and then that version might be the version to get. I just don't know if it has everything that the Dreamcast version does. Alright, well, I do want to mention some runner-ups. I did talk about Power Stone 2 and Sonic Adventure and Jet Grand Radio. I also want to throw Grandia 2 in there, which was also a number 12 contender. Probably, if I need to replay it, and it probably could sneak its way into this top 11 again later, maybe in a year or two when I actually get around to playing it on the HD collection. So those are some runners-up. Other good games include like Cannon Spike, if you like those overhead type of games. You can get Garrow Mark of the Wolves on the Dreamcast. You can get Last Blade 2 on the Dreamcast. You can get Choo Choo Rocket, which I haven't played. I have it, I just haven't played it, so I didn't really feel comfortable just throwing it on there based on my demo experience. Street Fighter 3, both Double Impact and Third Strike are on there. Dreamcast has a lot of good stuff. It's like I don't even remember half of anything else. But unsurprisingly, the number one game is Skies of Arcadia, which is in my top 10. Has been my number one. I adore Skies of Arcadia. I've talked about it extensively already on Levels Plus Weekly, as well as on the site. So I'm just going to keep it short and say that it's Sega's best RPG that they've made, and it's full of charm, has excellent characters, a delightful sense of exploration and discovery, a solid set of battle systems, one of the best soundtracks in games, and arguably the best main character trio in any RPG ever made in Vice, Ica, and Dina. It's just great. There's nothing poor about Skies of Arcadia, even on the Dreamcast. Legends is the better way to play this game. I will say that, because you get more content out of it, and they tweak the random battles so that it's a little less bothersome. And they move all the VMU stuff that is difficult to do on the Dreamcast now unless you have the VMU with good batteries and a lot of time. As just kind of an unlock through doing a bounty instead. But it's still the best game on the Dreamcast, in my opinion, even though the GameCube port is generally on like almost every level better. So, happy anniversary Dreamcast. You're 22 years old now. I don't really know what else to say, because that is wild. I do have many posts that I've talked about the Dreamcast on Levels Plus, so I will just dump a little link here and in the description, so you can check out more written stuff on like the Marvel vs. Games, Street Fighter Alpha 3, Soulcalibur, Skies of Arcadia, music from the system, my favorite intros, I think, from the system. There's some good ones, stuff like that. With that, I'm going to take a little pause, and we'll jump into the arcade history as the last segment for this week's episode. Arcade history time. So when I was 9 or 10, I'm gonna guess, I bought a Street Fighter II guide from a local supermarket and just poured probably tens of hours into looking through it, admiring the art, and just being absolutely floored with what that game represented. And that began a love affair of the genre and of Capcom specifically that I've had since then, honestly. It was around the same time I got Mega Man 3, which kind of further cemented my fandom for Capcom, and they're my favorite third party. They're not perfect, of course. They've had many missteps. But on the whole, they have done some wonderful things. In fact, I'm wearing a Strider shirt today because Strider's a big part of this discussion. So, fighting games. Fighting games are something that I've been really into from the moment I bought that guidebook. And when I had the opportunity to play Street Fighter II in the arcade, I took it. And that was the thing for a long time during the 90s, was Street Fighter II Champion Edition Turbo. I remember getting the Street Fighter II Turbo guide a little bit later. My original one kind of wore out, but the Turbo one I held on to for a long time until it wore out, but it took longer. That one got me in trouble at school because of some of Akiman's art of Chun-Li showing her butt pretty defined. And the yard teacher, I don't really remember what we would properly call those because I haven't been in elementary school in a while, managed to get a look while I was sharing it with a friend and yanked it from me and deemed it inappropriate. But my parents dealt with that situation and I did get the book back. But that was around the time that Super was coming out, and I remember seeing Super Street Fighter 2 in a local pizza place and playing that and just being floored by how awesome it looked. The big thing though is that despite having that guidebook and despite pouring so much of my childhood into looking over it, I never quite understood how it all worked. I wanted to really bad. I remember getting Street Fighter 2 for the Super Nintendo a couple times when I borrowed the system, and I was really trying to figure out like how do you do these fireballs? How do you throw the Dragon Punch? This was still in the early days before like the Japanese names of these moves actually became a little bit more commonly used. So Hadouken and Shoryuken, those weren't thrown around as much in the 90s as they are now, which is appropriate now. It should be that way. It should be the original language that they were in. But I just was like, I couldn't quite figure out how to make it work. Like I did okay. I think I actually did beat Street Fighter 2 without super deep knowledge of how to do special moves, but it was really like laborious to do it that way. It wasn't until I got the Dreamcast that I was able to actually sit down with Marvel vs. Capcom and learn how to do special moves, super moves, and basically understand the systems in play. Which, once you've learned one Capcom fighting game, generally speaking, you kind of learn a lot of them. I wouldn't say that's true for some of their efforts, like Star Gladiator does its own thing, if I recall correctly. I haven't played it. But like the knowledge I gained from Marvel Capcom, I could retroactively apply to Street Fighter 2 to some extent, even though the combo system's different, and they didn't have super moves, for instance, but the special move idea was still there, just implemented a little bit differently. And it works all the way up to their current fighting games. Most recent for me would be Ultimate Marvel 3, because I haven't played Street Fighter 5 or Marvel Infinite. And that knowledge also helped with SNK's games, because they kind of operate under the same principles. Now, when you get into stuff that operates differently, like Mortal Kombat, they've got a different means of making their stuff work. Injustice built off of that. So, like, I understand it, but it works differently. And then there's, like, Guilty Gear, and stuff by Arc System Works basically follows the Capcom formula of moves to some extent. So, once I was getting into my teens and going into high school, I was starting to see more Capcom fighting games than just Street Fighter 2 and its iterations, because X-Men, Children of the Atom, Marvel Superheroes, X vs. Street Fighter, Marvel vs. Capcom, and like Darkstalkers, all of those were starting to come out in the mid to late 90s. And like I said, Dreamcast didn't come into my possession until December of 99. So I wasn't still like super good at any of these games, but I was still enjoying playing them, and they were such a big part of my teenage experience. When I was able to get into an arcade. There was a restaurant downtown that had cabinets as well as the pizza place, and they had Marvel vs. Capcom and X vs. Street Fighter. So it was fun going in there and just playing those, even though I didn't know what I was doing, you know? My greatest arcade moment, though, comes with Marvel vs. Capcom 2. So I had played Marvel vs. Capcom 1 a lot, so I understood how it worked. And when Marvel vs. Capcom 2 came out, it was like the first time I had some experience with Capcom fighting games in terms of their mechanics and understanding how they work. I've been doing, like I said earlier, all of this research, all of this like digestion of news on it, that when it actually showed up at the mall where I used to go to university, I couldn't resist playing it. In fact, the irony was I was picking up the Dreamcast version of the game, but the place that I was going to buy it from wasn't open yet, but the mall arcade was. So I had like an hour to kill. So I got some tokens and I started playing Marvel vs. Capcom 2 for the first time. And the roster wasn't, like, the machine was so new that like the entire roster wasn't even there yet. So I think I was like mostly Shotos. I think I picked like Ryu, Sakura, and Akuma or something, and Gambit maybe. I think Gambit was in the arcade one as unlocked. So it might have been like Akuma, Sakura, and Gambit. I think that sounds right. And was just playing around with it, and I actually got into a couple matches with people and won. And I was like, woo! I was actually on a streak. I think I won 6 or 7 games in a row. And I was very, like, jazzed about it. Because, like, nobody knew how to play it fully yet. So, like, my lack of assists wasn't really hurting me. It would now, trying to get into that game with anyone with the remotest bit of experience with how it operates, they would use assist.
But I eventually lost, and by the time I lost, the store had opened, so I went and bought the game, and it was like just a delightful unity of events that day. It was a Marvel 2 day. And then basically my couple of experiences with Marvel 2 after that in the arcade were good, but they weren't like that. Like, I may have won one match, but if someone played me, they tended to know what they were doing a lot more capably than I did. So they knocked me out pretty quick. But, you know, at that point, like, the entire roster was unlocked, so I was able to, like... My usual team these days is Ken, Cammy, and Gambit. But I do mix it up a little bit from time to time. But that's, like, the team I feel strongest with. But in terms of tier lists, that's nothing, honestly. But they're fun, and that's a very fun game. I love that game. But like in terms of Street Fighter, like I played Street Fighter Alpha a little bit when I went to Lake Tahoe to go on vacation with my parents when they were doing their thing. I was playing Street Fighter Alpha quite a bit. Which is the weakest of the alphas, but that's the one that was out when I was doing that. I still enjoyed it. I remember beating it once or twice, I think, in the arcade. But I still wasn't, it was before learning, so it's like just, that was probably the best I actually learned a fighting game, a Capcom fighter before I owned Marvel vs. Capcom, was that one. Honestly, because I think I actually learned a bit with Guy, just like enough to function a little bit with him, but not anywhere like what I could do nowadays with him. You know what I mean? Like I think I figured out, oh, I could do this air leap thing if I do this, but there's just so many good memories of Capcom fighting games in the arcade for me. It's such a warm and fuzzy. It feels really good. But I think that's a good spot to end today's episode. And next week we'll come back to arcade history, and I'll talk about some other stuff I played in the 90s. There's quite a few other games that I can get into that I didn't touch on that are not Capcom. So that will be fun, and we'll see what else happens during the week. But I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on Sony's presser and my Dreamcast favorites and arcade history. Till next week, my friends, I hope you have a delightful 7 days, and I'll see you soon. Take care. So with that, we're going to take a little